For many years, an old woman carried water from an old abandoned well until one morning she discovered something that saved her life. You won't believe what she found. Greetings and welcome back to our channel. If you are new here, please subscribe to support our channel. Also press the alarm bell and turn on YouTube notification on your phone. Thank you and enjoy. Patricia was a poor and abandoned 54-year-old woman who lived from her birth in the town of Villa Tunari in the country of Bolivia, a place that went through the worst drought in its history, which caused a wave of people who, desperate for not being able to obtain the vital liquid, they migrated to other more modern cities with a better quality of life. Mrs. Patricia was a lovely and kind-hearted woman who suffered for a long time. She came from a poor family, illiterate parents, and for years she was married to a bad man, an abuser with whom she had two children, Sofia and Eduardo, two young children who throughout their lives were raised and educated with great dedication and love for his mother, who had to bear the burden of taking care of her children completely alone for many years since their father abandoned them when they were only 12 and 14 years old. Since then, Patricia tried to fulfill both roles for her children, that of father and mother. But unfortunately, the burden of keeping both children fed and safe was too much for poor Patricia, who had decided to be a mother with her ex-husband very late in life, and at that time she was 40 years old. Her ex-husband, a city man named Martin, was a womanizer who for more than 15 years was cheating on poor Patricia with other younger women and more attractive than her, which made Patricia very sad. But still, she didn't say anything to her husband, because if she tried to reproach him or simply touched on the topic of infidelity, Martin would go crazy and start threatening her or even beat her many times until she left her on the floor crying. Patricia lived through that hell with her children until one day she found a note in the kitchen that said, "I'm leaving this town, I can't take this boring life anymore. I found love in a younger and more beautiful woman than you, and I will move with her to the city to make a life far from here. Take care of the children yourself and keep the house. I hope I don't see you again." When Patricia read this, she began to cry. Her ex-husband was the only source of income in the house since he never let her work and much less go to university. For this reason, Patricia had to leave her home and move to a much smaller and cheaper place where she could sleep with her children, surviving for many years cleaning other people's houses and washing clothes, all in order to offer to children what they needed for their lives. As time went by, Mrs. Patricia's children grew up. Sofia, the eldest, was a very attractive young woman who one night while she was out partying, she found love in a young foreigner with whom she had chemistry, and a couple of weeks later, a relationship that Mrs. Patricia didn't support since this man was 10 years older than her daughter, and Mrs. Patricia feared for the integrity of her poor little daughter. This didn't matter to Sofia, and when she turned 21, she decided to leave her home with her boyfriend to never return, leaving her brother and mother completely alone in the town. For his part, Eduardo, Patricia's other son, was a good boy, studious and hardworking, who for several years helped his mother with cleaning the house while he finished the studies in high school, until on one occasion he notified his mom that his intention was to study at a university in the capital city because for many years he was trying hard to get good grades in school. Now all that dedication and hard work paid off since he had just been selected for a scholarship in the best university in the country, scholarship that will fully cover all the expenses during the 5 years that he studies last. This news made Patricia very happy, but at the same time she knew that this meant that her son had to leave town, leaving his mother completely alone. Since then, Mrs. Patricia has aged in her small apartment in total solitude, surviving only on the few savings she had from her years working on Mr. Luis Diaz ranch, a property that was for a long time one of the most prosperous in the area since it controlled most of the local livestock. But with the sudden death of Mr. Diaz, who left no heirs to continue working his land, the property was lost and all his employees, including Mrs. Patricia, remained jobless. It was then the poor lady decided to go out under the inclement sun and heat to beg through the streets of her town in search of help, and every day she traveled from end to end around her neighborhood to ask for food or some money to be able to survive. Months passed and Mrs. Patricia's appearance deteriorated more and more as the poor old woman spent days when she ate practically nothing and spent her only strength on long walks to the main river of the town, where every day she carried liters and liters of water to her home completely alone. Until one day during the summer of 2017, an impressive drought hit the entire state, especially affecting the town of Bilatonari, where the main river, which supplied the poorest communities in the village, dried up completely, leaving many men, women, and children without water, who, in desperation after the several months of extreme drought, abandoned their homes in search of a safer and more comfortable place to live. Poor Mrs. Patricia, who had nothing or no one who could help her, kept begging for days around the town until she realized that in the middle of the road to her house, the entrance of Mr. Luis Diaz's ranch was vandalized and half open, this place in which she worked for years as a domestic worker. The lady, faced with the need to get something to eat or maybe a little water, decided to go into the abandoned place when she entering the observe how the weather, the nature, the criminals wiped out and the entire property, leaving only rubble and dust. This situation greatly worried Mrs. Patricia, who for many years was in charge of keeping the main house on that land clean and shiny, and recalled that in the area furthest from the house there was an old underground well that connected to the main bathroom, and that was Mr. Diaz's favorite since that water was the cleanest in the whole place. Mrs. Patricia came to that old well, and to her surprise it was still intact. At that moment, the lady, using the little strength she had, managed to remove the heavy metal lid, and after collecting some of the crystalline water from that place, she drank a long sip of fresh water and exclaimed to heaven, thanking God for just a drunk for a long sip of fresh water, and exclaimed to heaven, thanking God for such a precious gift. Since then, Mrs. Patricia went every day to that well, and using an old wheelbarrow, she will slowly carried the buckets of water to her little house. Meanwhile, it fed by eating the fruits and rafters that were that tremendously fertile land, surviving on its own for 3 long years, until one day the drought ended and the heavy rains overflowed abandoned well, revealing a bottle floating in the middle of the water. Mrs. Patricia, who was already used to going and getting supplies in that place, was shocked when she saw that glass of bottle floating in the water of the well, and with a little effort she managed to remove the said container that was perfectly sealed and inside had a perfectly dry and preserved paper. Once in his place, the lady managed to open the mysterious glass bottle and realized that it was a little signed by Mr. Luis, in which he revealed that, in the absence of a direct heir to the estate of the man, each and every one of the wealth that the estate generated, as well as the legal ownership of it, would be passed on that person who found this document and delivered it to a judge. Mrs. Patricia was very excited and happy. She decided to be grateful for his opportunity that God gave to her to rebuild her life, and she went to the closest law firm to tell them exactly what she found. To the lawyers, at first, it seemed like a joke. How could such a poor lady find such an important document? But after reviewing the signature of Mr. Dias, it was ruled that the story was completely real, and so Mrs. Patricia went from being a poor and helpless woman to one of the wealthiest people in her town, all in return for her years of effort and dedication, and thanks to the will of God who never abandoned her during the most difficult moments. Currently, Mrs. Patricia is again with her son Edovaldo, who finished his studies as an agronomist and returned to his town to be able to work and the land of his new home on his mother's farm. This story teaches us that in the strongest and most suffering moments, we must have never stopped striving and believing in God. Because if we are good people and we strive to get ahead, He will take care of giving us our deserved reward. If you like this story, don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so that you can always be aware every time we upload a new video. Thank you very much and blessing.